I'm going to start here by just sharing, starting at kind of the basic level for everybody in the room who's already a notary, plus people that want to be notaries, and then people outside that are wondering how this process works. So at Textile, I guess one of the first things to state is, like, at Textile, we've been really focused on the client side of this marketplace and trying to figure out how to get more clients involved with creating data on the network. And so PhilPlus, really interestingly, is really focused on the security of the network, ensuring that people are using the network in a really positive way, and making this resource as valuable as possible, as far as storing good data. But the counter to that is that it can add obstacles for people that want to join the network and use it quickly. And so I've kind of put the hat on, like, in this conversation among notaries, of kind of trying to fight a little bit for simplicity and fight for kind of removing some of those barriers here and there. And I think we're getting a lot closer, and Deep and everybody else has been doing some awesome work, and the dashboard, for example, for transparency. But let me just show you where we are today. And I think that there's still challenges here, and I'll point them out. So when people come to PhilPlus, the kind of default pathway is they open the ticket on GitHub, and I'll show you one of the results of those in a second. When tickets are open for me, I actually just jump right into a rubric to score them. I have a set of questions that I ask them that then their responses let me sort of work through this rubric and come up with a score. And I don't need to go into the details of the equation here. This is based actually on another notary, Neo, who did the kind of groundwork to set this up. He shared it. I said, okay, that's awesome. That's the kind of structure that we need to get going. But basically, my rubric just works through, for semi-anonymous people, sometimes applying for data cap, you can start kind of picking away at, are they from an organization that's known, either through social profiles or other activities online? What is their reputation through past projects, both in our community and externally? And then what are their intentions? What are their stated intentions for using the network? Because if they haven't already used DataCap, or they don't have an address with storage history, you have to just you're gonna have to trust them the first time a bit and just ask them what they're planning to do. So, I ask about their minor distribution and what their use case is going to be, and thinking through, is this just a use case that is tacking on to things that we've already seen before, or is this something new that is really critical to have people experimenting on the network? So there should be some extra leeway there to let them experiment. And then basically I work through all the answers to this rubric, and on the other side it outputs the amount that sort of I feel comfortable giving them, and then that amount is what I grant them. And actually, overwhelmingly, this rubric has erred on the side of favoring them. And so I think I don't think there's actually a case where somebody passed getting data cap that they didn't get what they wanted. So they also state, like, I want 1 terabyte, or I want 100 terabytes, and the rubric will spit that out, and the levels have matched really well, overwhelmingly. So what does that look like in practice? So here's JV, just to pick on one. He applied for 100 gigabytes, and I think this was using my old version of the rubric, but he basically worked through each of these questions, gave the answers, and then on the other end, it popped out. We gave him the 100 gigabytes of data cap. Simple as that. So some obvious weaknesses to this. One is a lot of these questions are still fairly subjective. So the external reputation, for example, I have to there's no easy way to just say, okay, this number makes sense. And I think that's the biggest weakness here. But one thing I'd really love to see happen as we want to onboard more notaries into the space, I'd love to see this kind of rubric get sort of reviewed by all the existing notaries, and say, okay, what are the best practices here that we could, maybe it's only a subset of this, that we could recommend to all future notaries, that they start there, that they could build their points of view from that starting place. And so this has already been shared on the notaries channels, so happy to share again, but perhaps we could make a small project before we onboard the next batch of notaries to give some guidance on what kind of rubric they could start with. Whether they choose to use that or not is up to them. I know that there's other notaries with other rubrics too. So perhaps we can come up with the right Frankenstein here as a starting place. Right. So some other interesting things, like I started. We also apply for data caps, so textile has projects that we're working through, and one interesting thing that emerges is the difference between how you judge a company applying versus the project that they're applying for. And so we've had to apply for multiple data caps. That's something that we should expect quite a bit from larger organizations that don't want to mix their private keys among projects. So you don't necessarily want all of your data being created by a single address. So you're going to need to apply for multiple data caps. So how do we deal with that? Like, do we have to make them apply again? Do we split up data caps? Do we have them define different projects? Another thing is the notary that I applied for actually asked, when I applied for a second data cap, they asked, well, how has your first data cap been going? And I thought that was really good. And so I used Reba Sushi's script. If you haven't seen it, I can share it in Zoom to output some stats on my own address. And so this is actually covered in Deep's dashboard now, but I output the stats from my own address and posted them on the original data cap application. I think something like a bot that did this automatically after checkpoints would be pretty amazing way to track the progress of a data cap being deployed. So here's my application for data cap. It was an old one. I applied for 9 terabytes. And so, maybe a month or 3 months later, spitting out the progress on how that data cap has been used would be great for transparency. It would make it easy for the notaries to go and just get the notification and see this unfolding. But I thought that was really good. The other thing is, so Deep mentioned I started building the stats here to spit out how all the notaries were progressing through issues. So basically this time to data cap is really important, and just wanting to kind of start finding where people were getting caught up in the process and try to reduce this to, day or days maximum. Because when you're a new user on Filecoin, it's a really bad user experience if the first thing you have to do is wait weeks to test your idea. And so I think most of this is now covered in the dashboard that's been built. The only thing that maybe is different and interesting is this runs daily now, and it builds up a history of these stats. And so if you ever want to go and do some fun analytics here, you can go check us all and see how we've been progressing through this. And so I'll just leave this running now, and maybe this will become redundant with other places this history is being captured, but it could be an interesting data source for people that want to dig into what's going on. Some other things that I think are really important, 2 things combined. I found that having to review people that were applying for small data caps is sort of pointless. Like, we should just be letting them play on the network. And so we got this approved, which bumped up the Glyph data cap deployment to 32 gigabyte, which is, I think, a reasonable amount to start playing. At least they get to fill a sector or send off a few deals. I think it could actually go higher. I think we would be pretty safe going higher. I did the calculation someplace in here, actually. I think I share the calculation that it's like 30,000. You'd have to create 30,000 fake GitHub accounts to get a petabyte of data onto the network with the 32 gigabytes. So you could imagine we could probably like bump that by 10 or 100 and be pretty safe. And so anyway, that's for consideration later. But the really great thing there is that gets people in exploring without having to go through this Fill Plus application process. And then I think the most important piece after that is actually this FIP, which would allow the top up of data caps. And the reason that's critical is those 2 things can combine. And so we could actually start letting people start with small data caps and coming up with a process where they can automatically top up based on outputs like this that actually show the distribution of their data across a fair set of miners, and that they're using the network in an interesting way. And so those things all really excite me. So hopefully this rubric can get slimmer and slimmer, and we can base it more on these automated processes that are connected more to the economics of Filecoin. With that, I guess those are all my points. So kind of very excited for the future. Really want to start a conversation about these rubrics and getting new notaries onboarded and keeping that client sort of experience minimal and short.